Welcome to Unseen Rite, where every locked door in history has a key, and tonight we turn it. The year is 1851, the place, Richmond, Virginia. Two brothers born into power died in pieces. What if I told you they were never meant to survive? What if their family wealth came not just from tobacco, but from bodies sold to science? And what if the medical college that took them in never intended to let them out? This is the true story of Thomas and Timothy Henderson, identical twins raised in the shadows of privilege, secrecy, and horror. But before we continue the story of what happened behind the stone walls of the Virginia Medical College, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss these dark historical mysteries. Tell us in the comments, what state are you listening from? We love hearing from our viewers across America. They were born under smoke, literally. Their family estate sat between tobacco fields and mass graves. It wasn't uncommon to hear wagons at night, unmarked, quick, heavy. Local rumor said the Hendersons were selling something more than crops. But in 1851, people didn't question the wealthy. They whispered and obeyed. Thomas and Timothy were strange boys, quiet, always watching. Some said they spoke in their own language, gestures only they understood. Others claimed Timothy could mimic voices perfectly, even the preachers. By age 10, the help refused to stay. By 14, 3 enslaved workers were found dead in the smokehouse. The sheriff called it an accident. The physician called it early signs of mental strain. Their father called Dr. Cornelius Hartwell. Hartwell wasn't a doctor in the traditional sense. He believed trauma could unlock genius or unleash monsters. He wanted proof. And the Henderson twins? They were his test. The boys were committed to the Virginia Medical College with signed consent from their father. It was meant to be a brief observation. It became a one-way stay. Behind locked doors, they weren't patients. They were subjects. They say the first scream was heard on the second night. No one came. Because Hartwell had warned them. They must break before they become. And one did, but not the one they expected. The doctor who needed monsters. The Medical College of Virginia was proud of its marble halls and gas-lit corridors, but its reputation was built on more than education. It was built on what it could bury. Dr. Cornelius Hartwell didn't wear the white coat of a physician. He wore black gloves, always. Some said it was to hide acid scars. Others whispered it was because he couldn't stand the feel of skin. But Hartwell wasn't interested in curing sickness. He was interested in testing the soul. Hartwell believed evil was measurable, traceable, repeatable. And in the Henderson twins, he saw a rare opportunity. Two minds formed from the same origin, but diverging under pressure. The twins were housed separately, no contact. Thomas, the gentler one, was fed stories of salvation. He was isolated, prayed over, kept in white rooms filled with music and floral scent. Timothy, the colder one, was subjected to the opposite. He was locked in darkness, surrounded by screams, fed on rot, rage, and recordings of his own voice warped into chaos. Hartwell called it emotional polarity therapy. Each day his students took notes, not of healing, but of decay. Thomas began speaking in tongues. Timothy stopped speaking at all, but wrote pages, dozens of them, repeating the same line over and over. He's not my mirror anymore. Then came the changes. Thomas began waking up with scratches he couldn't explain. His fingernails were clean, but his brothers were not. Timothy claimed to dream things before they happened. One morning the hall lights failed. The basement doors unlocked on their own, and a medical assistant named Jacob Gray was found catatonic near Timothy's chamber, mumbling, "He looked at me through the wall. He blinked from the wrong side." Hartwell was thrilled. "Stress has crystallized them," he wrote in his private logbook. "We are now past theory. This is the replication of evil." But what Hartwell didn't realize was that something was replicating him. Thomas began asking about his mother's voice. Even though she'd been dead for 8 years, Timothy stopped sleeping altogether. And then, without warning, Timothy disappeared. The door was locked, the guards were sure, but he was gone. And where his bed had been was a pool of something that wasn't quite blood. The echo chamber. They searched every inch of the basement that night. Behind walls, inside old cadaver drawers, even the unused anatomy theatres sealed since the cholera outbreak. But Timothy Henderson had vanished like smoke in a sealed jar. The only clue? A single line scratched into the floor beneath his bed. He took my face. Dr. Hartwell called it an episode. He told faculty Timothy had likely suffered a breakdown and wandered off campus. But behind closed doors, he told his inner circle something different. We're not watching twins anymore, we're watching reflections choose their form. The medical students, once eager, now flinched at night shifts when claimed to hear humming in the surgical hall, matching the lullaby Timothy's mother used to sing. Another said the mirrors in the lower washroom didn't reflect your movements right away, like they were thinking first. And then came the blackouts. Every Thursday at 3:12 a.m., the main gas lamps failed. Temperature dropped, and the building's old servant bells, long since disconnected, began to ring. Thomas, still locked in the upper chamber, began whispering during these episodes. Not in English, not in Latin, but in mirror script, perfectly reversed. He scratched symbols into the walls, using a spoon filed down to a point. A student translated the writing. It wasn't a message. It was a prescription, a formula. Hartwell's fascination curdled into fear. He increased Thomas's sedation, ordered all mirrors removed from his chamber, and sealed the basement with iron locks. But still, things worsened. One orderly was found dead in the courtyard, his own face peeled back like a mask. His last words, "He's not gone. He's just waiting for the right twin to let him back in." Hartwell's personal journal grew erratic. Pages torn out. Scribbles replaced sentences. Drawings of eyes always watching filled the margins. One entry stood out. "The experiment has split more than the twins. The institution itself is bleeding." Then came the final blow. A nurse tending to Thomas screamed during evening rounds. When others arrived, she was in shock, staring at the boy's face. Because Thomas now had Timothy's eyes. The chamber of reversals. By dawn, the faculty had reached a silent agreement. They could not let Thomas leave that room. Not for tests, not for air. They brought food, but never spoke. They cleaned him, but never looked into his eyes. Because those weren't Thomas's eyes anymore. They were sharper, hungrier, and when the gaslight flickered, they glowed. Dr. Hartwell, once poised and calculating, now paced like a man hunted. He stopped lecturing, stopped shaving, and began referring to his patient as the conduit. In his journal he wrote, "One twin housed a soul, the other a passage. We wanted to separate their minds. Instead, we freed something buried in both." Meanwhile, the institution was collapsing from within. Patients reported reflections that didn't match. Books were found rewritten, with chapters reversed word for word. A cadaver rose mid-dissection and laughed before collapsing again. The laughter, it matched Timothy's voice. One student, brilliant and skeptical, demanded proof. So Hartwell allowed him into Thomas's chamber, just for 5 minutes. The student entered confident. He never returned. When they broke down the door, the boy was huddled in the corner, muttering a single phrase. "He's not behind the eyes, he's behind the glass." In desperation, Hartwell turned to something forbidden, a manuscript he had once dismissed as myth, a pre-Civil War occult surgical guide written by Dr. Eli Marlowe. The book was banned, its pages soaked in ash to prevent copying. But Hartwell had memorized enough. He believed that Timothy hadn't died. He had mirrored, escaped into the reflective space behind consciousness, waiting for a vessel. And Thomas had opened the door. The next night, Hartwell performed a forbidden procedure. He called it the inversion. He covered every mirror in the building, lit candles in a perfect circle, injected Thomas with a sedative mixed with untested compounds. Then he whispered a sequence, a string of syllables he did not understand but had learned phonetically from Marlowe's manuscript. Thomas began to convulse. His spine arched, his jaw dislocated, and his voice split in two. One cried in agony. The other laughed. The inversion failed. But something else succeeded. The walls bled. The room's temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Every mirror in the building cracked. And Thomas, he looked up, smiled and said, "You brought me back wrong, doctor. Now we both get to watch." Anatomy of a collapse. By the time the first faculty member went missing, no one was asking questions aloud. They whispered instead, behind closed doors, behind surgical curtains, behind the cold hiss of sterilizers no longer in use, because the walls had begun to hear. It started with Dr. Penning's head of anatomy. He walked into the basement archives to retrieve patient files. 3 hours later, all they found was his coat, still warm, neatly folded beside a puddle of spinal fluid. The disappearance ignited paranoia. Students refused to sleep in the dormitory wing. Blaming, they heard 2 sets of footsteps following them in perfect unison. Patients screamed at reflections, accusing them of watching back. And every clock on campus stopped at 3:11 a.m., the time Hartwell first drew blood from the twins. The medical board sent a formal request for investigation. Hartwell responded by resigning, but not before leaving behind his final entry. There are twins in all of us, one that breathes, one that remembers the first breath we ever stole. Thomas has become the memory. Timothy is now the breath. A sealed room beneath the surgical theater, long forgotten, was unsealed at midnight. Inside they found 2 child-sized restraints bolted to opposite ends of a copper table, candles melted into the shape of spinal columns, and a ledger containing only patient numbers and no names. The final page, signed not by Hartwell, but by Thomas. You called me an experiment. I became the mirror. Now look. The college called in reinforcements, psychologists, clergy, federal inspectors. None lasted more than 72 hours. One nun was found in the courtyard, eyes clawed out, mumbling, "The boy with no shadow kissed me while I prayed." After that, the school went dark. Officially, closed due to structural instability. Unofficially, sealed by federal order. Every cadaver was incinerated, every record redacted, and the room where the inversion occurred, bricked shut. 3 layers deep, but legends began to surface, of a twin in black wandering the edge of Virginia's woods, offering strangers a mirror and asking, "Do you want to see your other self?" The mirror boy. They say trauma echoes across generations, but in Virginia it knocks, and if you open the door, you don't just see it, it sees you. 2 years after the college was sealed, a group of surveyors sent to repurpose the land never filed their final report, but a local teen, Silas Monroe, claimed he saw them one night. They were just standing there, 5 men in a circle, staring at a little boy in the middle. He wasn't blinking, but they were crying. Silas's mother found him the next morning, rocking in the cellar, whispering the same phrase, "He took my shadow, now I take his." Rumors exploded. Locals began calling it the Mirror Boy curse. Anyone who stepped onto the old campus grounds would dream of a white room, no windows, no doors, and a voice whispering, "Tell me who you were before you knew who you are." Then came the sealed letters, delivered to residents within a 12-mile radius, typed on antique parchment. Each one contained only 3 things. 1, a charcoal drawing of the twins, smiling. 2, a fragment of medical gauze, stained. 3, and a phrase written in childlike script. You were part of this. Some burned the letters, some kept them. But the ones who kept them started losing time. One woman, a retired nurse named Eleanor Vexley, was found pacing her garden at 3 a.m. every night for weeks. Her husband finally followed her. She was planting baby teeth. When confronted, she only said, "They didn't belong to me, but they remember me." Researchers have since found evidence of a hidden vault beneath the original surgical theater, sealed with 19th century symbols of alchemical inversion. It's rumored to house the original surgical instruments, the boy's preserved spinal tissue, and something labeled only as Heartbeat Stage 2. The vault has never been opened, because no one who's tried survived the attempt. So what was Hartwell really doing? What ritual disguised as medicine? What inversion disguised as therapy? Because here's the final truth. Timothy didn't just die. He crossed over into a system we still use today, one built on obedience, detachment, and replication. He became the blueprint, and Thomas, the lens through which we continue to observe ourselves, falsely. The Hartwell cipher. They thought it was over. 2 dead boys, a vanished doctor, a college left in ruins. But evil doesn't dissolve. It hides in the margins, in the footnotes, in the ink. Only certain eyes are trained to read. In 1873, a private collector in Baltimore acquired what he believed was an original teaching journal from Dr. Cornelius Hartwell. It appeared harmless at first. Diagrams, anatomical notes, scribbled Latin phrases, until a linguistics scholar noticed something strange. Every seventh word on every seventh page formed a separate sentence. It read, "The twins were only phase one." What followed was decades of decoding. The journal wasn't a log of past events. It was a manual, a blueprint. Hartwell had mapped out a full psychological schema, how to fragment the human mind, implant artificial empathy, and manufacture obedience through sensory starvation and emotional inversion. One section detailed an experiment called the reversal protocol. Subjects were to be placed in isolation, given artificial memories, taught empathy through mimicry, punished for genuine emotion. The end goal? A soul that performs love without feeling it. A body that smiles, but never bonds. And the scariest part, modern psychologists now recognize many of these methods as precursors to institutional conditioning practices. Think about it. The military's use of dehumanization drills, certain boarding schools employing character correction through silence, experimental therapy methods designed to strip before they rebuild. None of these practices cite Hartwell, but his fingerprints are there, like a ghost surgeon still stitching minds. And then there's the symbol, a small engraving at the bottom of the cipher pages. Two boys, one blacked out, the other staring directly at the viewer, surrounded by a circle of thorns. It matches the carvings found inside the sealed surgical vault, and on a series of unmarked graves recently discovered beneath the college. Graves containing remains of children. Children who were never reported missing. Children who had no names in the records, but their skulls all had identical incisions. So ask yourself, was Hartwell just a rogue scientist? Or was he the first architect of a system far larger? A system still evolving. Because here's the darkest truth yet. Timothy and Thomas were not the end. They were the baseline. And somewhere in that cipher, Hartwell mapped out Phase 2. Phase 2 was never abandoned. It was supposed to end in the 1800s, with the death of the twins, with Hartwell's disappearance, with sealed documents and institutional silence. But it didn't, because Hartwell didn't vanish. He relocated, and what he took with him wasn't just notes. It was a model still used in places that claim to rehabilitate, but are designed to reprogram. In 1904, a psychiatric facility opened in rural Pennsylvania under the name the Briar Institute, funded anonymously, staffed by physicians trained in Europe. Its motto, shape the soul, spare the rod. At first glance, it seemed progressive. No beatings, no restraints, just behavioral calibration and affect alignment. But when investigators finally got access to the files in 1978, they found children admitted without cause. The patients taught scripted empathy phrases to earn food. Entire memory sequences rewritten using trauma response cycles. Mirrors removed from rooms to prevent identity fixation. And a diagram in the administrator's drawer, a replica of Hartwell's ciphered journal. Worse still, buried in the logs were case numbers, not names. Dozens of them. And every seventh patient flagged as non-compliant with mimicry protocol. What happened to them? There are no discharge papers, only a repeating note. Archived. And then came the files from 2001. A whistleblower released a set of internal memos from a private defense contractor. They outlined a training regime for interrogators using empathy mimicry nullification, the exact terminology Hartwell invented. Same stages, same language, same outcomes. Except now, it was being taught at scale. And what about us, the viewers, the consumers of this history? Look around. Social conditioning apps that reward you for sounding sincere. Customer service bots, taught to respond with simulated concern. Job interview guides that emphasize mimicking empathy rather than feeling it. We are now in Phase 2, not as test subjects, but as participants. The chilling truth. We learned to mirror before we learned to feel. We were shaped to smile on cue, We were engineered to comply, long before we ever said yes. The blueprint didn't vanish. It was licensed, and Hartwell's dream, it didn't die. It evolved through systems, institutions, and even education. The final ledger. It was locked inside a copper vault, discovered during a demolition in 1994. The last wing of the original Medical College of Virginia, sealed since 1852. What the crew found wasn't debris. It was a library of violation. Charred journals, glass cases, stained surgical aprons, and in the center, a single iron box inside a ledger. No title, no name, only a symbol, two interlocked circles, one black, one white, burned into the cover. The ledger wasn't written in ink. It was scrawled in a mix of gall, charcoal, and something organic. Chemical analysis failed to identify the fluid, but every page pulsed with intent. And each entry detailed a subject, a method, and a result. Subjects like Specimen 13 responds only to maternal vocal triggers. Specimen 27, heart rate stable during simulated executions. The Specimen 34, successful dissociation from memory loop, mimics regret on command. Next to each one, a check mark, a progress bar, and then a price. Because here's where it gets worse. The final pages weren't about twins. They were about groups, clusters of children, family units, whole communities, coded by region, bloodline, and emotional resistance thresholds. They were building profiles, not just patients, not just for study, but for replication. One line read, Midwest batch, promising mimicry rates, potential for scalable obedience. Another, Southern class, poor resilience to auditory stresses, recommend substitution techniques. These weren't medical notes. They were engineering specs. And in the last entry, a single phrase. If this book is found, it means you are now a node. Node of what? A system. A network of programmed empathy, of feigned guilt, of pre-approved reactions. Not just in institutions, but in culture, in media, in you. Because this isn't just about history anymore. This ledger outlived its authors. Its formulas evolved. The institutions changed logos, but not methods. And here's the part that no one dares to publish. The ledger wasn't alone. A second book was listed, the Mirror Volume. It was meant for those who couldn't be programmed, those who saw through the scripts, those whose empathy was real but dangerous. Its title? Null Entry, and it was never found. Null Entry. Welcome to the final threshold. This isn't just the end of a story. It's the beginning of a realization you may never unsee. Because the deeper we followed the Henderson twins, the clearer it became. They weren't the anomaly. They were the prototype. The second volume, the Null Entry Ledger, was never recovered. But fragments were whispered through black market archives and anonymous whistleblowers. When former psychiatric technician from a federal facility in Illinois claimed to have seen a copy, bound in human hide. Text only visible under blood plasma light, not stored, sealed. Unlike the first ledger, this one didn't track success. It tracked failure. It listed people, mostly children, who resisted compliance techniques, who couldn't be broken, couldn't be silenced, couldn't be mirrored. Their names were coded, but patterns emerged. They asked too many questions. They didn't respond to grief scripting. They failed empathy simulations, but not out of apathy, out of clarity. They knew they were being tested. The Null Entry children were labeled echo hazards. Why? Because once exposed to others, they awakened something. A recognition, a subtle alarm, like static behind your thoughts. It was said their presence caused therapists to change methods, judges to forget sentences, and priests to stutter mid-sermon. Some entries claimed their touch altered polygraph results. Others described dreams transmitted after eye contact. And then one chilling line, if they learn they are nulls, the system collapses. Here's where you come in, if you've made it this far. If your stomach turned when Timothy's brain was removed. If your pulse quickened reading about synthetic guilt. If you've ever felt something was off but couldn't name it, you might be a null, not broken, not flawed, just unmirrored. You don't fit the simulation, and the simulation knows it. In closing, consider this. Thomas and Timothy weren't born monsters. They were split by design, one molded for mimicry, the other discarded as defective. But maybe it wasn't a failure. Maybe Timothy's silence was protection. Maybe Thomas's breakdown was resistance. And maybe, just maybe, the real experiment is still running. So ask yourself, why do some people fake compassion so well? And why do others feel too much, as if they're carrying someone else's pain? What if that someone was engineered to disappear? Welcome to the Unseen Rite, where history isn't just forgotten, it's programmed to forget you. Subscribe for more forbidden stories, and if this series has shifted something in you, comment "I am a null" twice. Let them know you woke up. Let them know you remember, because silence was never your fault. It was their design.